Data on the Rocks podcast is Solidify's quest to share the stories behind the people involved in the data industry. The Rocks part of the name refers to the idea of having a conversation outside of the regular business context, of enjoying a casual conversation for the sake of it, and for getting to know the people who are passionate about data and willing to share their stories. Our guest today is Toby Dayton, President and CEO of LinkUp. Welcome, Toby.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, happy to be here.
We want to begin with our connection. I've known Toby, yourself, and the team at LinkUp for almost 2 years now. I've come to know LinkUp as leaders in job market data who index millions of job listings every day from company websites. And in that sense, there's actually a bit of a kinship with what Solidify does because we're really doing something very similar with small business profiles. When I think about purpose-built data companies that create value for their customers based on having very rich data assets, LinkUp stands out to me as an organization that has been doing it better and longer than pretty much everybody else. So, Toby, we're excited to have you on the basis of your background and the great work that you and the team are doing at LinkUp.
Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Before we dive into the substance of the conversation, of course, we have to be true to the mission of understanding the enjoyment of a drink, a beverage of some kind. And full disclosure for our listeners, this is early morning, relatively early morning for Toby and I. And being the responsible people that we are, I think we're both enjoying a warm beverage. I think a nice cup of coffee at your end, Toby. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah,
my standard morning beverage.
Yeah, and what's in your cup today? What can you tell us about the coffee you're having this morning?
I am very much a Starbucks coffee drinker and pretty routine dark roast typically, and yeah, I think this is I don't know, Vienna, or I would guess that's kind of my go-to morning coffee.
And do you run out and get that in the morning, or is that something you're brewing at home? Is it?
No, we're brewing in-house. Used to when we were back in the office, which seems like eons ago. I would get stop at an actual Starbucks on the way into the office, but now it is on days I'm home. I am brewing here.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated with the language of ordering coffee. Starbucks in particular, the secret menu that actually my kids introduced me to. It was like this different world, and it's the thing is I'm actually quite a straightforward kind of coffee drinker. I just enjoy a traditional roasted coffee like you, a dark roast of some kind. It's not an elaborate exercise for me, but I always listen to people ordering, and it's like they are talking a different language to me.
It can be pretty amusing, unless the line is really deep, and then it can get to be a little annoying.
I guess when we like yourself, I brew most of my coffee at home, so we don't have to go through that experience. But it does make coffee drinking kind of entertaining. Well, that's great, and really, again, the theme with enjoying a cup. I'm actually having a cup of tea. I start my morning with a little Nespresso, one of those little pod-based systems, capsule-based systems, and then I usually switch to a tea. So I'm enjoying a cup of tea with you as we talk through today. So thank you again for joining it. One of the things I've had the chance to get to know you over the past couple of years, and recently we talked about your past, and I want to go back to your college days actually, and begin with your studies. I know about your interest in reading and history, but you took an English Lit degree in college, and was that an obvious choice for you when you think about where you came out of high school and where you thought you might go in your career? Was that a logical choice for you? Was that a tough choice?
It was not tough at all, and it really I'd always just lifelong very avid reader forever, and when I got to through high school and enjoyed reading a ton, and got to college, and just that was the thought of being able to read for 4 years in classes was really fun, and then obviously developing skills to learn how to write about literature was fun, and I enjoyed the writing aspect of it too. So it was very natural. I think in hindsight, the one thing that I always wonder. I could have equally have been a math major, which I still have sort of an obsession with math, but it was
Interesting.
sort of I at the time that was not as evident to me as it was later on in life. So literature in college was very very natural for me.
Yeah. And I know, I know afterwards, you took an MBA in finance, so there's that business side as well. Obviously, with your role as CEO, I'm sure that comes in handy. But I'm trying to think of when one takes an English lit major, how much latitude do you have to study other disciplines? And did you take things that were outside of literature itself?
I did. I went to a liberal arts college up in upstate New York, and so it was very much a concentration in literature. But I was actually was political science as well, minor,
Okay.
and then took a lot of art classes. Actually, it was Skidmore College is where I went, and they had a phenomenal arts program, and so I actually did a lot of metalsmithing and jewelry making. So
Oh
I had
wow.
a pretty diverse background in college, which was just a blast. I loved it. Loved it.
Yeah, I mean that's an incredible array. What an interesting combination of things. Does the metal work, is that continued as a hobby in adult life?
It has actually. Yeah, I've got a
Interesting.
small little studio in my basement and still work on it. And yeah,
Wow.
it's been a lot of fun to. It's pretty modest. I'm not doing any major casting or kind of major things, but it has something on and off over the years that I've kept up.
Yeah, that's nice. Anything on the horizon right now in the way of a project in the basement?
Well, actually, funny, my oldest son is getting married, and he asked if I would make his wedding band. So I actually did this winter. Was
Wow.
working on a wedding band for him, and so it was a little more pressure than I'm used to. So it was a little different than projects in the past, but it was fun. I loved it. Just loved it.
What a great legacy, though. I mean, to pass that on, and you'll he and his wife will enjoy that, and it'll be what a great heirloom for the family. Actually, that's a really nice
Yeah,
touch.
yeah, it was
Well,
really fun. It was great.
I can remember doing some welding way back in high school, I think, and so but I fair to say I don't have uh, anything I would be particularly proud of sharing with you. So I'll leave it at I would have a lot to learn from you. I guess that's probably my way of thinking of it at this point. But
That's fun.
yeah, one of the things you did talk as well. We've talked in the past about history. So I'm thinking of English Lit as your study, as as the program you're in. But uh, can you talk a little bit about your interest in history and um, how active are you still in learning and reading about history?
Quite a bit actually. It's been sort of interesting as I think about over the years. Really was very through college and for quite a number of years afterwards was very much focused on fiction and literature and but that migrated over the last I don't know 10 20 years where the vast majority of what I'm reading these days is now nonfiction and
Right.
history. And I have a couple of different sort of areas of focus, and one of which, probably the biggest of which, is World War II and sort of Europe in sort of 19th 20th century Europe,
Yes.
and that really has been an area of focus, and with that it's sort of the history, and I don't it's not so much sort of the war and the battles. It's much more the Holocaust, number one, and sort of Jewish survival stories and
Right.
resistance is really I'm just continuously amazed, and the wealth of stories there that it just is an unbelievable, obviously, part of human history that continues to
Very
be a
much
very
so.
significant focus of mine. And that's sort of backed up. I sort of now just finished a book called Sleepwalkers on the origins of World War One,
World War
actually,
One.
which obviously
Yes.
led to World War Two, and so sort of backing up in time, and now I've turned it, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and I'm sort of moving backwards in time, European history in time, but it just is. I don't, for whatever reason, not quite sure. I don't know exactly where it stemmed from, but that just continues to be a fascination of mine, sort of modern, effectively modern European history.
Yeah, and I think I just wanted to touch on Sleepwalkers actually, which is on my list to read based on your recommendation. For our listeners, it's called Sleepwalkers: How Europe Went to War in 1914 by Christopher Clark. Toby? What did you find most captivating about that story? I mean, of course, it's an enormous story, but is there something specific that really changed your thinking about European history? Was there something that stood out in that story?
Well, I, there were a lot of things. The
Yeah.
people involved, I think, was and the sort of politics of it all, and I think one of the main thesis of the book is that World War One, while people look back and assume that it was absolutely inevitable and that it was this sort of foregone conclusion that Europe was gonna march towards war, the thesis of the book is that it could have just as easily not happened. And
Yes.
that to me is sort of a very fascinating, counterfactual hypothesis. How could it have come about otherwise? And that sort of lens on all the machinations that were going on and these great, grand alliances and the Triple Entente and the Balkan and the decline of the Ottoman Empire, all these things going
Yes.
on. It was a lot of history there that I had known sort of superficially and sort of was aware of, but when you really get into it, it is a maze of complexity that is, I had vastly underestimated how complex that sort of
Right.
19th century European history really was, and some of the origins of even the nation states that were really brand new countries. And it was just
Right.
it was really it's pretty dense, but once you sort of get into it and acclimate to the density, it becomes a very, if it's an area of interest, it becomes a very, and I sort of switched back between Kindle and reading a
Yes.
book, Audible, and in this one, it was I did it with Audible, which was a very, for me, a very accessible way to wade through it. Makes
Fantastic.
driving commute time go by very, very quickly.
Yeah, I bet. I'm sure you can occasionally miss a street or a turn or something like that if the story is really
Exactly.
riveting at a point in time. We're going to spend some time later on talking about data, but I just, I think about history as a subject matter and kind of the purpose of studying history and learning from it. And then I think about data, which is, completely different realm, I guess. But is there a connection between history and data? Do you see any kind of parallel in what we try to achieve with data versus what we try to learn from history?
I that's a that's a really that's a great question. Yes, I mean, for me, the commonality of the two um, is an innate curiosity, trying to answer questions, and I think you can look to history, you can look to data, you can look to different sources of information to try to better understand, and then extrapolate into the future and predict and forecast and strategize about what might come about in the future. And I think very much so that data and history and along those lines serve a very similar purpose as just a rich source of insight into how the world today is organized and what's happening. And
Yes.
in a lot of cases it can be very obvious and it can be quite hidden, and the sophistication that you apply to understanding that, I think, unlocks value, can unlock value in the form of insights
Right.
the more time you spend digging into it, and that to me is, I think there are a lot of similarities there actually.
I suppose there's a couple basic parallels in the fact that we know in the world of data there's a hierarchy from whether we think of it in literal terms of something like dirty data or raw data up to, as you said, curated insights. And with history, we also have the idea that that there's different interpretations, that there can be an evolution of a story or even a fact. There can be revisionist views of things and so on. So there is this idea of there are facts, and then there's this idea that there's an interpretation of the facts, and together those form a we hope, certainly from a data perspective, we hope those insights create the intended value. And but there's parallels in truth here as well, the
Yeah.
concept of truth.
Right.
And we
Yeah.
might come, yeah, please, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I
Yeah.
was going to say, and there's a structure, there's an organization, there's a language, there's context, there's a taxonomy there. So again, there's a surface level understanding, but as you get deeper
Right.
into both history or data, there is a increasing sophistication that can occur that allows you to better understand, better leverage, and better generate the kinds of insights and outcomes that you're looking to achieve as you dig deeper into it. And it is, I think, in a lot of ways, the parallels there for what we're seeing, what you're seeing in the sort of alternative data space, I think are fascinating as this whole
Yes.
industry has evolved quite quickly over the last 5 to 10 years, and is in a lot of ways accelerating in how dynamic it really is changing.
And we want to touch upon both of those sort of storylines. I'll call them the idea of the link between, I'll call it data and truth. I want to come back to that later on, and then just as you described the evolution of alternative data, the amazing rise of it as a means of garnering legitimate insights, meaningful material insights into business trends, for example. Let's come back to that as well, because I think that's really central to one of the stories that we want to touch on today. I want to talk about career for a moment, more than a few moments, I guess, just to give our listeners a sense of your connection to data through the course of your career. And I want to start after you came out of college. You joined an organization, I believe, based in Minneapolis, called Cherry Tree, an investment
Yes.
banking firm. And just if you could describe your role there and what the connection with data was, even in those early days for you.
Yeah, so there were that was so right out of college, I actually went out to D.C. and was working on Capitol Hill. Politics was and sort of public policy was an interest of mine. Then I got married, moved back to the Twin Cities, and in Minneapolis, and worked for a nonprofit environmental group, sort of a nonpartisan environmental group, bringing stakeholders together to solve environmental issues. And with that, we actually got an EPA grant to help businesses develop back then sort of environmental management programs, and positions within large corporations were very new. And so we received an EPA grant to help companies, mostly Fortune 500 size companies, develop their environmental management programs. That really was my introduction to the private sector. And I
Okay.
became fascinated with business, and then ended up working with another a business partner of mine. We built a technology company sort of in the late 90s that we ended up selling, and that was really my introduction to sort of startups and business, and that really was where I found that that's where I wanted to be, was building businesses. So I ended up at Cherry Tree after that, because I really wanted to. I was still pretty brand new, even having worked in a technology company. I was still pretty new to companies and the private sector, and I wanted to see a variety of different business models and founders, and I wanted to raise some capital and help businesses just get
Right.
some deal experience and just sort of immerse myself into that world for a couple of years. But I knew that I wanted to get back into an operating role, but this was a way to really climb a pretty steep learning curve pretty quickly. And so I ended up at Cherry Tree, which is a boutique venture development company and investment
Mm-hmm.
bank here in Minneapolis, and was working on a portfolio of about half a dozen very early stage
Right.
companies that ranged from an entrepreneur who had an idea that came to us, and we sort of incubated companies, to companies that had formed but were very new, and we helped them sort of prepare their business plan and raise a seed round. And we Cherry Tree had a venture was a venture capital firm, but this fund was, or this initiative was really a venture development where they weren't necessarily putting their own capital, but they were incubating companies and then would take an equity stake and then develop these companies. And actually, LinkUp was one of those companies
Right.
very early on that we started working with. So it was part of this portfolio I was working on. And over time, it became it garnered more and more of my attention and focus,
Right.
to the point where, we hired the CEO, and, or actually it was a board member, an investor, and then a chairman, and then he became CEO. And he and I started working together. We raised a bunch of rounds of capital. And after about a year and a half, he finally said, "Hey, I need you over here full time." And it was a very
Amazing.
logical transition. So that's sort of how I ended up there. But it was really from the earliest origins of the company, and that was about 20 plus years ago. So it's been working with the company for quite some time.
For quite some time. What a great story. I mean, that's about as ground floor as ground floor gets.
Yeah,
And as you're talking, the storyline of a boutique firm with VC expertise helping startups, that's still an incredibly relevant story today. In fact, it's
right.
really, if you look back, I'm sure that was groundbreaking. The idea of trying to create, develop expertise within a company, and then provide the capital raises necessary to see the company succeed. Um, and you were doing that 20 plus years ago. So very, very exciting, very relevant to the data world as well, as we now think about, as you said earlier, this explosion in alternative data. How many companies do we see now going through the very same experience? Solidify being one of them, by the way. We're excited about what our future will hold. But yeah, that's what a great storyline. And so, what was LinkUp like? We're going to talk about what LinkUp is today later on, but what was LinkUp about at that time? You stepped into the company. This is 2002 or three era, roughly.
Yeah, it was. It was exactly, and it was. I'm gonna date myself horribly, because the business model back then was multimedia recruitment advertising, and so we literally were printing part of the multimedia. One of the media formats that we were working in was literally a printed newspaper. So we had a jobs classified weekly newspaper that we were printing.
Love it.
So as the average listener will now think I'm 110 years old, but it is literally, back in the day, that was where employment classifieds was the Sunday newspaper. And so we were competing against the large. At the time, they were in starting their decline, for sure, and the disruption that occurred with the internet in sort of the late 90s, and the emergence back then of Monster and Career Builder and Yahoo Hot
Right.
Jobs. So those were kind of the big three. But so the legacy business, which we did thankfully shut down quite a while ago, but it was print, web, radio, and TV. So it was a
Amazing.
local unit model. We were focused primarily on secondary and tertiary markets, competing against literally the entrenched daily newspaper monopolist that was
Right.
gouging local employers and charging just egregious prices for a little tiny print ad on the Sunday classifieds. And that's
Right.
really we were competing against them. And then as Monster and Career Builder started to gain traction, obviously the web was a huge disruptor. But we also brought in broadcast media, radio and TV. So it was, again, multimedia recruitment advertising, and that's the we've always been focused on the human capital management space, and that's
Right.
really a lot of the DNA that exists even to this day in LinkUp. Really, really emerged from the origins of the company, helping companies find better candidates for their openings and helping job seekers find better job opportunities. And our focus then was very much on quality and really creating a vastly superior value proposition for both employers and job seekers. And again, that's
Yes.
translated very much into sort of how LinkUp emerged as we started to see companies posting jobs on their company websites.
Yeah. What an exciting history the company has. And to be clear, the at the point in time we're now talking about, meaning the early days, the origin of LinkUp, you were very much a media company, not a data company. Is that a fair way to
Correct.
put it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
We were, yeah, it was absolutely. We were publishing, and the media, the content was the advertising. So it was sort of content and advertising and across multimedia channels, expanding it out nationally. And as we were rolling out markets, and that it was a fantastic time in a business to be in. Had really significant growth rates up into the sort of '07, '08 period. Obviously, then the Great Recession hit, and that was sort of a different phase of our evolution as
yes.
unemployment shot up from up to real unemployment effectively shot up to about 20-25%. Literally, it was
Wow.
kind of a bloodbath period. But
Yeah.
but but you're right, exactly. Back then, it was very much recruitment, advertising, and talent acquisition. Back in the day.
Did Was there a moment then, as you progress, today, I would describe to people LinkUp being a pure data company, and again, we're going to talk about the current state in a bit. But getting to that point, was there a point in time for you, a threshold or a milestone where you saw the vision of data being the future of the company? What when might that have happened, or was there I mean,
There,
in retrospect, maybe there's a precise moment, but what was it
well,
like
it
being on
happened.
board?
It was a little bit of a combination of both.
Yeah.
There was definitely an aha moment for us, a really sort of impactful, very significant point in time, and then after that, it sort of emerged a little bit more slowly after that. So the back in well, from the origins of the business, as I said, the focus was on quality, and we were really
Yes.
competing against the other providers. The daily newspapers had their own issues and content. As they were declining, they started degrading their offerings and really
Okay.
doing a disservice. And they also started accepting really frauds and scams and a bunch of garbage into their classified business. And the likewise, and even with Monster and Career Builder, they also, because it was a duration based pay to post model, anybody could pay $99 and put an ad up on Career Builder or Monster. So you got a
Right.
lot of very questionable, very low quality job openings and opportunities, a lot of scams and fraud. Those
Interesting.
companies, they never took jobs off their job boards because they wanted to have millions of
Just
jobs. So they
volume.
never took them
Sure.
down. So you have duplicates, you have expired listings, you have fraud, scams, phishing jobs. And then when the aggregators came along, the Indeeds and Simply Hired, they started aggregating all of the job boards. So you had massive duplication. So everybody had in the industry, essentially the entire ecosystem, each of the providers had their own flaws. And so what our vision was to compete with a much higher quality solution for employers and job seekers. And that when we started to see back in 2003, 2004, that companies started posting job openings directly on their own company websites,
Right.
we instantly said that's the business we want to be in. Those are the jobs. They're the highest quality. They're always current. When the position is filled, companies take it off their company website because they don't want applications for jobs that are no longer available. We knew that they're real jobs, real companies. When you apply to those jobs, your application is going to the hiring manager.
Right.
That
Right.
really was our sort of the epiphany we had, was that was where we wanted to focus the business on. So we started literally back in 2003, started scraping jobs directly from company websites, started indexing
Amazing.
those. And that was really the origins of LinkUp. We knew that we had fantastic quality, and
Right.
that for us, the content, the ads were data to us, and that we knew that was a valuable asset. But it took us until about 2009. That was always sort of inside the legacy business, which was called JobDig. That business of LinkUp was always sort of internal. We knew it would be the future of the company, but JobDig was growing so
Right.
significantly then that the LinkUp
Right.
side of the business was kind of in this sort of R&D, and we were using the data ourselves to generate leads. Actually, for us, for the JobDig business, we were populating, as we rolled out new markets, we were using the online
Yes.
listings to populate our website. So we were our own data client effectively for about 6 years. And then in 2009, in the sort of throes of the Great Recession, we
Yes.
launched LinkUp and just said, this is, it was probably a little bit sooner than we had anticipated, but we were in survival mode pretty significantly at the time.
Right. Right.
And
Of course. Sure.
so that's really, we rolled LinkUp out and launched the company effectively in 2009. And that's where, and then very, very quickly, we became a data company for sort of a number of things happened quite quickly that we essentially became a data company right then.
Right. And I know over time and even up to the present, the media side of the business started to take a backseat. Eventually, you've refocused the company, even as of very recent past this year, you've refocused the company into a pure data company. So the story you're telling of transition from a media origin to gaining data savvy, data scraping, data index capabilities, the focus on quality now leads us to the current state of being a pure data company with that same resolve around quality. One of the things, it's tempting to ask you what you learned about the value of data all along, but I think your story is um, revealing that as we speak. I do want to talk though about the language, I guess, that we use to describe our respective companies, and I'm specifically thinking of the connotations of saying I'm a web scraper versus the connotations of saying I index
Mm-hmm.
content on the web. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? What those words mean to you, and kind of the purposefulness in saying that? Because I think LinkUp very very much says we index content, right? That's the
Right.
chosen language. Can you
It,
talk about those
you
two
know,
words and the meanings? Yeah.
yeah, it is, and they are, you know, we have sort of an interesting history in how the language we use and the way we describe the business and over the years, and it really, because we've been in and around the human capital management space, the job board space, job search engine,
Yes.
and competing against just a wide variety of different kinds of companies. It's really the human capital management space, talent acquisition, recruitment, advertising space is really complex, which again, I think in a lot of ways has some very significant parallels to the data business, the alternative data business. So we have been very well served by having grown up in this sort of HCM space, human capital management. And it also has informed our business strategy going forward about how we think about the broader ecosystem and the varied nature of what is emerging, and very much what has been part of our business model of working with a
Yes.
wide variety of partners and competitors and partners and platforms, and the ecosystem is in data is becoming very quickly as complex as the HCM space has been for decades. But the language really, in a lot of ways, when our model early on was always Google. And that's really when we started, we really fashioned ourselves and said, we want to be essentially a vertical specific with job content, job listings.
Yes.
We wanted to be a search engine for jobs. So we literally said
Right.
we're a job search engine. We really wanted to differentiate ourselves away from Indeed and Simply Hired, who were not scraping jobs in their original businesses. They were not indexing jobs. They were not scraping jobs from job boards. From company websites. They were only getting their jobs from job board feeds. So they were aggregating all these feeds.
Right.
We were very intentional about how we said we're not an aggregator. We're a job search engine, and we really tried to differentiate ourselves that way. I think we, it is always, it's tough when you're trying to, sort of position yourself in your own sort of white space in an industry. It can be sometimes it can go different ways.
It's an educational process, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So we became quite particular about that, and then and because Google was sort of our who we look to as the model of what we were trying to become and emulate. We did basically started adopting that phrase. We were indexing jobs, and that was kind of the vernacular that we adopted. I think as we have moved into becoming a pure play data company, and we can come to sort of the transition there when LinkUp was really started in 2009, we had this dual nature of our business with recruitment advertising, pay-per-click recruitment advertising on one side, and data on the other. From day one, we had revenue on both sides of the business, and starting effectively immediately in 2009. But we can come back to sort of what we did on those two businesses most recently. But we brought that vernacular into our business, our data business, and indexing jobs. But the broader industry today, it is clearly, we're put in the web scraped data category. And I think that for us, it's natural. I think it makes sense, but there are some positive and negative connotations that come along with web scraped data. And I think some of the sort of risk and compliance and legality issues come into play, and web scraping, and that, that's a whole different side of things that I think we want. And again, it's very similar to the human capital management space. There are people who are very pay close attention to doing things the right way, and others who don't. And I think web scraped data has got that similar bifurcation, and we have always been very, very diligent about doing things the right way with how we scrape data, what we do.
Excellent.
So we try, and it's an ongoing battle, but we try to very much differentiate ourselves from the negative side of web scraped data, which I think rightly so has got some.
Yes.
There's a negative side to that, to web scrape data, that we really steer well clear of.
You're touching on the important topic.
It's an interesting thing, that sort of language language and classifications of an industry and an ecosystem. It in some ways, people I think can get hung up on it unnecessarily so, but in other cases it really does matter. And language really does, that sort of taxonomy of how an industry and how people think about it. It really, it can be quite significant.
When we talk about, in this case being Solidify, we talk about what we do. We never self-describe ourselves as web scrapers. We talk very much the same language around quality, around indexing, and what people come to realize, I think those that are listening, is that anyone can scrape. Scraping itself is such a basic activity. The barrier to being able to scrape content is extremely low. Any one of us can do it off of our browsers today, whether we have a means, a goal in mind or not. On the other hand, organizing and structuring data, refreshing that data, making it relevant, managing the quality of that data, and hence the value of the resultant data is an entirely different undertaking. Yeah. When you look at LinkUp today, and for those that aren't familiar with the high quality information you do provide, there's a universe, Toby, I'm thinking, I'm going to get the number wrong maybe, but about 100 and maybe upwards of 200,000 companies, 175 to 200,000. Am I in the right range of entities?
Leverage? We have, we're approaching about 100,000 companies in our,
I'm sorry, okay.
in the data set. And the data set goes back to 2007. We're approaching about 200 million job openings,
wow,
records all time. So the data set is quite large, and it is global in nature, and updated daily. And as you said, I would agree with you entirely. As we've said to people, anybody can scrape a job site, a company's website,
right.
A job from it. It is doing that at scale every day across around the world, from tens and tens of thousands of companies, is a massive undertaking. And I think people, it's been an interesting evolution as well, as we've tried to convey to certain people,
yes,
who really underestimate what that takes to do that at scale that way. And again, similar to, I'm sure, what you experienced, people don't realize how challenging that can be.
And having been following this activity both at Solidify and LinkUp for a few years now, I would say, my knowledge, personal knowledge of what it takes to be good at what you just described, my personal knowledge is growing. I still would describe myself as learning, very much in a learning mode of how this scaling works. I find when we talk about scaling, and it's very much embedded into the story of Solidify, we throw out crazy numbers like, indexing 700 billion pages of content a week. But there's power to the idea of scaling. And so you're very much in that. You've been doing it far longer, than any other company I'm aware of. What is it about the power of the story then, about scaling? What is it that makes that story relevant and exciting to be a part of? So you're doing this incredible job of capturing all this content. What is it about the power of scale that has meaning today?
Well, it in a lot of ways, it really emanates from those earliest days of LinkUp's origins back in 2009, 2010. And we had, our competing in that space. And again, coming out of the sort of job board, job search engine space, one of the characteristics from a competitive standpoint was scale, was size. How big of an index do you have? How many jobs? Right. What's the breadth of your coverage? And so that game of who's got the most jobs on their site was very much just part of, naturally, an orientation towards large scale. So yes, our goal at time was we wanted to have literally the largest index of job openings indexed directly from company websites. So right away, going back even to 2003, 2004, the goal was how fast can we get to an index? And we had back then it was, okay, we've got 1 million jobs, we've got 2 million
Right.
jobs, we've got 3 million. We
Right.
had these great events in the company every time we cracked that milestone of, getting to 1 million jobs, 2 million, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it was, that really became a barometer of how we measure ourselves. And I think rightly so. um, when we got into the data side of the business, the first use cases for us as a data company, aside from selling the job listings to,
Yes.
we created feeds to power other job sites. So our first revenue streams in the data business really came from selling our data to other job boards. And in fact, back in the day, we became, our two biggest clients were Career Builder and Monster. We were powering those job sites. And so when Monster came out and I can't remember exactly the year, but sort of 2013, 14, and they came out with the vision of all the jobs and all the people. We actually were powering the all the jobs piece of that. We were white
Yes.
labeling this content, and had a similar relationship with Career Builder, that they were putting our jobs on a subsite of theirs called betterjobs.com, which was, we always thought was, we took a lot of pride in being put on this career builder site called betterjobs.com. But that scale was always part of what we aspired to, because it was that coverage of being able to literally be a one-stop shop for a job seeker
Yes.
was. And then in the data business for our clients, scale mattered a lot, and the size of the data set was really significant. But then after the human capital management space, we started to, and we've since been a significant, the financial industry and capital markets has been a huge area of growth, which is sort of another chapter in the story. But
Yes.
one of the earliest use cases of our data was trying to leverage our data set to forecast non-farm payrolls. And again, when you think about the job market and trying to forecast what's happening with unemployment and net job gains on a monthly basis, and especially coming out with the focus at the time in 2009, 2010, when is
Yes.
this recession going to end? When is job growth going to come back? When is the economy going to start to recover? The intensity of focus on the labor market was very severe. So we started seeing if there were some signals in our data. And again, that scale mattered, because you had to have a sufficiently representative sample of job openings
Right.
to actually make an accurate forecast. And luckily for us, at the time, we did have enough jobs there, and the signals were high and correlations were high to job growth in future periods. But scale mattered a lot. So it's always been part of our DNA, is to continue to build and grow and expand the size of the data set.
Excellent. There is in the data business, we both face this. There is this sense of what I've always called like kind of the arms race. The speeds and feeds of our respective data sets. Records, freshness, all of the things that we like to be able to quantify that our customers expect us to be informed about, to expect us to be aware of our position in the market. I have this many records, I have this many listings. We refresh it on this rate and so on. So there's very much that arms race kind of mentality, I guess, in data. But at the same time, we have to be thinking about quality and the value that we're creating for customers. As the data assets, as LinkUp's data, as the coverage has grown, the listings have grown. You mentioned the milestones that you've achieved over time. How have you seen the manner in which your customers are using your data? How has that changed significantly? In other words, has the volume of content changed how your customers use your data?
Yes. Yes, very much so. Both the volume and I think the use cases. the segments, the buyer segments, and I'll circle back to sort of capital markets and the financial industry, asset
Right.
management industry is definitely a unique set of use cases and has really transformed our business. And now most recently, the third part of that I think that's changing things is sort of this. The evolution in the industry and the emergence of tools and dashboards and
Right.
platforms and people who are building things and working with data and making
Right.
it sort of democratizing data and bringing it to a wider audience with more use cases, more specialization. That is also very significantly unlocking value in our data, and we're working very, very aggressively with a range of partners to on that side. So there are a lot of sort of aspects to by which our data set is being transformed and is
Okay.
evolving over time, definitely. But the size and scale is certainly one of them. We're you know, it's always relative for us. We think about a large data set, and I think we are, but then we turn to a company like yours and we're a drop in a bucket compared to the data, size and scale that you're working with. So it's all relative in terms of
It is.
where people are.
Yeah, and just it's interesting because you've got and it's evident from so many of the comments you've shared with us today. You've got this high focus on quality, of course. You've got this understanding of building out an asset over time. The idea that you're building both an active repository of insight of jobs that reflects the current state, but you've got a history as well that you've been very mindful, I guess, of curating and building, right? That you're thinking about the asset, therefore, in many dimensions. And again, thinking about our listeners, if they heard you, as you referred to, excuse me, sorry about that. As you referred to a moment ago, you talked about there being roughly 100,000 active organizations that you're tracking, I guess, to put it in layman's terms. Why not? I guess the analogy is, wake up tomorrow and make that 200,000 companies. Toby,
Right.
It's not as easy as that, of course, but what would go into that kind of decision-making process for you in terms of growing the footprint? Um,
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm implying that would be a positive, but what would go into that process? What plans do you have to make? What thoughts what obstacles would you come up against in just saying we want to be double the size?
Right. So the from the earliest days with the data, the focus was on jobs indexed directly from company websites. So and when we say companies, we really mean employers, because it can be
Right.
companies, public, private, nonprofits, government entities, but they have to have the employer has to have, one, a website, and two, they have to have job listings on that website. So very quickly,
That
and this
universe.
becomes a
Yeah.
really interesting discussion over the years. What are the percentage of the roughly millions and millions of businesses in and again, by sort of tax ID, you start
Yes.
with sort of a universe of, I'm pulling out numbers, these are probably inaccurate numbers, but roughly 10 million
Yes.
businesses in the US that
U.S.
have
Yeah.
a unique tax ID. But then you get to how many are actual businesses with employees, how many
Yep.
have a website, and how many have job listings on that website. You very
Love it.
quickly get down to
Yeah.
a very, under 250,000 for sure, and it would
Wow.
be even less than that. And that's where we are right now in terms of when we're adding a new company in the U.S., and I'll come back to global, because global is different than where the U.S. is at the
Yes.
forefront of companies that have a website and that have job listings on it. But when we add a new company to LinkUp today, that is a brand new company that is being scraped, typically it's a brand new company, it is emerging, or it's a very, very small business that has
Yes.
less than 3 job openings on it. We're so far down into the deep long tail
Yes.
of jobs that are, and that's there are cases where bigger companies get added, or it's a spin-off, or it's a there's corporate actions that can take place where that's not always the case, or they emerge in day one and they've got a huge round of funding and they're hiring like crazy, and they start,
Right.
and on day two they
Just
have
explodes. Yeah.
350 job openings on their website. So it's not 100% of the time, but typically we are very much down in that deep long tail. And in fact, and I've had debates with labor economists and people who study
Yes.
the job market and are
Yes.
focus their entire careers, this fascinating debate about how many job openings are out there by what number of companies. And people say,
That
what do you mean?
distribution.
I mean, it's just the distribution of job openings. We literally have, in any given month, we have about 3/4 of the job openings in the U.S. at any given time. And that is, and the rest are companies that don't have a website, or don't have job openings on their website, or and they're very typically very, very small companies. So we have the vast amount of job openings that are out there, and yet it's less than about 25,000 companies that have job openings on any given day. And furthermore, when you start to put a histogram together of that, the S&P 500, for example, has over a million job openings in just 500 companies. So, and then the largest 1,000 companies have about 2 million jobs. The largest
Amazing.
10,000 companies have about 5 million job openings. So you
Yes.
start to get into actually what employment looks like in the U.S. You start to get into some really interesting insights about, and again, that's changed over time with the emergence of large businesses and
Yes.
sort of concentration of labor demand, and that's a whole different topic. But it's fascinating sort of to look at from a macro standpoint.
Yeah, very good. I'm as you're speaking, I'm visualizing an inverted pyramid when I think about the labor market, where the top of it is the largest companies and the greatest amount of jobs, going down to that very long tail that you're describing, towards the bottom of that inverted pyramid. And I'm thinking of it in those visual terms. I don't know if that's apropos or not, but whereas I'm thinking that the world that Solidify understands is the opposite of that. It's the number of companies that participate in the economy,
Right.
right, that drive a certain portion of the GDP of the U.S. economy. It takes a lot of small companies to drive 50% of the GDP in the U.S., which is usually the number that is attributed to small business, and then conversely, a much smaller number of large companies that have this massive impact on GDP. That pyramid would be, in our view, very wide at the bottom and very, 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 very sharp and steeply pointed up to a very few number of companies at the top.
Right.
Anyway, that's my own way of looking.
And I think the interesting thing on that side is that while small, it sort of goes back to the discussion around what powers the U.S. economy, and this
Right.
And people say small businesses are the backbone of the economy, and that, I think there are, to your point exactly, that I don't think that's a false statement.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily where job growth is coming from, where the GDP and the output and the productivity and innovation, all kinds of different things, you can point to small business as being a very, very critical engine of the U.S. economy. But when you look at job growth, that's a very different thing, because a lot of those small businesses may not be aggressively hiring. and adding one or two people
Right.
it's material for those businesses. And in the aggregate, it certainly is not insignificant, but it is not where it's not going to necessarily move the needle on employment up or down in a very significant way, especially now over time. And literally at one point I still sort of point to it because it was such a fascinating conversation. We were working with a university that was looking at our data for research, and they were very focused on the economy and the job market and labor. And they pulled up our data, and we walked them through it, and they flat out said, "Your data is wrong." And we said,
Wow.
"What do you mean?" He said, this is absolutely, there's no way the U.S. economy looks like this." And they were literally looking at the concentration on the large company side. We said, we literally had a debate for about an hour, and they just refused to believe that all of the labor demand was so heavily concentrated in larger businesses. They expected to see a much sort of broader, wider distribution curve, and it really we and they ended up saying they just didn't believe our data, and we walked them through as much as we could, and it was, again, it's sort of this disconnect that people have of small businesses are the backbone of the economy versus where where labor demand is occurring, and that disconnect is not easy for people to always connect those two equally true statements.
I think this whole area is a topic unto itself. Actually, I'd love to do more research on our side. I'm thinking of the possibility of one day having you back on to talk about this dynamic specifically. It would be really great for our two companies to kind of compare our perspectives on the makeup of the economy, and from a structural perspective. That said, I want to just bring us towards a close today, and we've touched on the idea of what alternative data is a little bit, the emergence of alternative data. You referred to it quite earlier in our discussion, that there indeed has been an explosion in the last 5 to 10 years, and I see LinkUp as being very much in the thick of that growth. Where do you think the market's going for alternative data? Where do you think we are in the evolution and the maturity of alternative data?
Yeah, it is something we think about, obviously, as do you, quite intensely, and it really is pervasive in our thinking, where the industry is going, where we are.
Yeah.
From our perspective, we as you said, we've been in the alternative data space for since really its earliest origins. So it's been fun to see it evolve and grow over time, and that change, as I mentioned, it is accelerating. The pace of the rate of change is accelerating. I think the alternative data, it is maturing is maybe the wrong word, because that sort of then implies that we're we sort of know what the endpoint is. So I wouldn't
Right.
presume to know sort of
No.
where we are in the ultimate life cycle. I think data is absolutely going to become, and is rapidly becoming, if not already has become, just an absolute sort of bedrock foundational element of business today and the world today. So I think we're very much in the early stages, broadly speaking.
Right.
But I think from a sort of, as you get in from a sort of macro perspective down into kind of a micro perspective, I think there is a lot going on. It is rapidly evolving, where, as I mentioned, the sort of democratization of data is occurring very rapidly as companies. The ecosystem is developing really rapidly to bring data and make it accessible and valuable to a vastly broader audience very, very quickly. So back when we started selling our data to asset management firms, and our earliest clients were large global systematic quants that had huge data teams, very sophisticated use cases. They could ingest big, large, raw data sets like ours. They could do all the work that was entailed to gain insights and value out of that data. It was, it was a very small universe of companies back in sort of, 5-10 years ago that could leverage data sets like ours. But today we're now working with companies who are smaller. They are accessing tools and dashboards and
Yes.
KPIs and analytics and
Yes.
things that we're working with. Our partners are working with, are building products and solutions that you really don't have to have a data team to leverage. You don't have to have that deep expertise in data science. That still is very much a use case, but the spectrum
Right.
of sophistication has expanded significantly down into essentially just the broader mass audience of users of data. And I think that is it
The,
is incredibly exciting for us and you and everybody in and around the space, but it also introduces an enormous amount of complexity to figure out and work with this massive transformation that is
this
underway
ecosystem.
in
Yeah.
the space.
Yeah. And making sure, our data is in the right place at the right time for those intended uses. But that's an exciting
Exactly.
future you're talking about. And I know as we think about LinkUp in 2022, in June of 2022, you're now a company that is resolutely focused on data. You've monetized some of the other traditional parts of your business now. You're looking ahead as a pure data company. What excites you the most, Toby, about the future in the market you're serving?
I would say it really is just that. It is now finally. So we have about a year and a half ago, we spun out our recruitment ad business under the Get Work brand and have recently had a transaction. We've sold that business to Adzuna, which is a fantastic company in the job space. They have a number of job sites in about 20 countries around the world, and just a fantastic team. They're based over in the UK, and we're
Nice.
looking to expand their presence in the US. So it was a great place for Get Work to end up. We couldn't be happier. But for us, now we are, as you said, a pure play data company, and to be able to focus entirely on our data business is really exciting for us. And we've loved having those long, deep roots in the human capital management space. I think they still very much are part of our DNA, part of our genetic makeup
Right.
that have made us the business we are today. But it's nice to have the ability to focus solely on the data business. Though both businesses had gotten big enough where it became increasingly challenging to work on and grow and sort of optimize both sides of the business. Really, what led to the decision to divest that Get Work business, and now we're in a position to be able to focus entirely on that growth. And I think as we look forward, the opportunity is literally limitless in terms of where we see the use cases and applications of our data to uh, help businesses make better decisions, help investors generate increased returns, to help people and public policy, government. There are just so many different use cases around our data that we're really looking forward to what lies ahead for the company.
Fantastic. Toby, this has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Um, we just in reflecting uh, on you, I'm thinking of a love of coffee, a love of history and books, and the newest thing of all, a love of metallurgy. So thank you for sharing that and the great story behind LinkUp today. It's been a great conversation, and we really appreciate you being on Data on the Rocks today with the Solidify team. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well. It's been fantastic. I really appreciate it. It's been fun talking with you as well.